Meanwhile, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria. Alexander is a port city in Egypt, one of the major cities of the Roman ancient world at this point in time, and one of the most educated. This is where the famous ancient library was, and the famous lighthouse of Pharos that was here too. And it had a heavy Jewish population. It was a Greek city in a Roman colony, which Egypt at this point was just a Roman colony. It was a Greek city. It was established by Alexander the Great, and it was a major hub of commerce and academia, and it was a major Jewish city. A good chunk of the population were Jews, and they were very, very educated, very intelligent people coming from Alexandria. So that's what this guy is. A Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus while Paul was gone. But Priscilla and Aquila are still there. He was a learned man with a thorough knowledge of the Scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor, or with great fervor in the Spirit, according to the footnotes, and taught about Jesus accurately. But he knew only the baptism of John. That was the baptism of repentance that was preparing the way for the person who was going to come after John, which was Jesus. And he taught about Jesus accurately. I don't know exactly how this is possible. Okay, this whole scenario is very strange and puzzling to me. It seems as though there was a narrow window of time in the mid-1st century AD, which is exactly what this is, to be like in the early to mid-50s AD. It seems as though there was a narrow window of time in which John the Baptist had like a sort of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a cult, but some kind of following. He'd been dead for 20 years at this point. John the Baptist had died at least 20 years earlier. And of course, Jesus had come and gone too by this point. I don't know how anybody would know about John the Baptist and know about Jesus, but not know that Jesus was the figure John the Baptist was talking about. I don't really. It must have just been a very particular, very specific window of time in which this could happen. He was from Alexandria, this guy Apollos, so the Christian message had gotten to Egypt, because that's where Alexandria was, which is not unreasonable, because Egypt is not far. I mean, if it's in Greece, it'd be in Egypt too by this point. It's not that far. But there seems to have been like a very narrow window of time and opportunity in which a specific version of the message or the good news was preached, that preached about John, preached about Jesus accurately, but somehow didn't link the two. That would have been a very narrow window of time. And it gets closed, okay? That window gets closed here in this passage. But apparently, up to this point in time, for around this, there was a very small segment of the population that knew about John, knew about Jesus, believed in them both, but didn't connect them correctly. Anyway, and this guy would have been kind of like the spokesman for that group, I guess. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor and taught about Jesus accurately, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue. When Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God more adequately. So they heard him, and they knew that something was off about his message. So they invited him to their home and filled in the gaps, basically. Now this, of course, is going to be a major point of controversy because we have a woman teaching a man in her home. And, of course, her husband is there, too, but she's listed first, indicating that she was the dominant half of this pair. It wasn't in public, for one. For those for whom this is a big problem, keep in mind that, for one thing, her husband was present. It wasn't just her. And secondly, it was in their home. It was not in public. They did not reprimand Apollos in public. Priscilla did not undermine Apollos' authority in front of the congregation by calling him out in public. Whatever they did privately in their own home, and Aquila, the husband, was present at the time. So that should mollify any concerns you may have. When Apollos wanted to go to Achaia, the brothers encouraged him. That'd be basically Corinth. That's where he ends up. The brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples there to welcome him. This is actually going to be kind of important. So Apollos is coming to Corinth with what we would call letters of recommendation. He is going to Achaia. He ends up going to Corinth. And he's going to be bringing with him, or someone is sending ahead of him, letters recommending him. This is going to be important because one of the problems that we're going to have in the Corinthian church to come is this idea that different groups of people in the congregation were attaching themselves to different leading figures in the church, one of whom was Apollos. And they're going to criticize Paul for not having letters of recommendation. Apollos did. So Apollos came from Alexandria. He was well educated. He was a very eloquent speaker. And they liked him, apparently. Apparently they liked him a lot. And he had letters of recommendation, kind of commending him to them. Paul didn't have any of that. Now, Paul was a very educated, very intelligent person. But he doesn't seem to have been as good of a rhetorical speaker as Apollos was. And he did not have letters of recommendation. And he came to them very humbly and very almost bedraggled. And that seems to have bothered them. That seems to have bothered the Corinthians. By the time Paul is writing his letter to them, Apollos is not even there anymore. He's not even at Corinth anymore. I'm not sure who's in charge at the moment. But one of the problems that they seem to have is that some of them are kind of casting themselves in the mold of Apollos, and they're having divisions over which of these prominent leaders is like their guy. And he mentions Peter too. So at some point Peter went to Corinth. We don't have any data about that in Acts, but at some point Peter was also in Corinth. But the primary problem seems to have been between those who favored Apollos versus those who favored Paul. But we'll read about that when we read the letter to the Corinthians, but it is important to note right now to help set some of the context for that. On arriving, he was a great help to those who by grace had believed. Paul is gone by this point. He's not there anymore. Priscilla and Aquila aren't there anymore. Presumably Silas still is. We haven't read about Silas since chapter 18, verse 1, verse 5. So presumably he's still there. Maybe Timothy. I'm not sure exactly where they are. Silas will eventually hook up with Peter, possibly when Peter goes to Corinth. I don't know. But we never hear about him again in Acts, so I don't know whatever happened to him. So I'm not sure who's in charge at Corinth at this time, but now Apollos is there. And he was a great help to those who by grace had believed. For he vigorously refuted the Jews in public debate, proving from the Scriptures that Jesus was the Christ. Now time for a break.